Now, some of the people who are listening to this might think, you know, this sounds absolutely sadomasochistic. I mean, why would people in a soul group, as you referred to it, agree to shame each other in a lifetime, and then when they return to the afterlife state, they remember the agreements they've made, and growth somehow comes of this? I think this concept might perplex some people.
It's a very difficult concept to understand intellectually, and again, this is why I encourage people to take it into their hearts and try to understand it through feeling. But to answer your question, it's very important to understand it from the perspective of the soul. A lifetime is very, very brief. It's no more than a clap of thunder. And yet the wisdom that comes out of it becomes part of the soul for literally all eternity. So in John's case, as he comes into a remembrance of himself as a holy, eternal soul, from the soul's perspective, this results in a more profound self-knowing, a greater self-awareness of oneself as love, as the energy of love. The suffering that John endures by being shamed by people, from the soul's perspective, is very, very brief, very transitory, but that wisdom, that more profound self-knowing, the soul has that now for all eternity.
Why plan these incidents? Why plan anything? What's the point? What's the purpose?
Well, one of the reasons we discussed a moment ago, and that is to balance karma, but there are several others that are very important. One is healing, and an example of that is a woman, Penelope, who's in the chapter in Courageous Souls on deafness and blindness. Penelope planned before she was born to be born completely deaf. Now, why did she do this? In her lifetime, immediately prior to this one, Penelope had the same mother she has in this lifetime. In that lifetime, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. She didn't actually see the murder, but she was within hearing range and she heard the gunshots that killed her mother. As you can imagine, she was quite traumatized by that. In fact, it led her to commit suicide in that lifetime. So she carried this energy of trauma with her, and when she was reviewing her life and talking with her spirit guide, she decided she wanted to have a lifetime in which she would heal that trauma. The spirit guide said to her, and we heard this word for word in the planning session, he said, "My dear, would you like to be born deaf so that no similar trauma happens to you again?" And she said, "Yes, that is what I want and what I wish to do." So she came into this lifetime to heal the trauma from the past life and make sure that it didn't happen again.
That's very difficult to put into words, but I'll just use a crude metaphor that this is so crude, but it's very difficult to think of physical ways to express this. So if you're sitting on your living room couch watching the television, it's super comfortable and nice. You can sit there all day. You just sit there forever, and then eventually you say, I think I'm going to go for a run. Like, why would you ever voluntarily get off the couch, go outside and run and put your body under stress and maybe suffer for a while you're running? Why would we ever voluntarily do that? Well, there's something that is available, a growth that is available only under the stress of the run. So now that's a very basic metaphor. Here, what we are experiencing is the stress of the counter pressure of circumstance, the counter pressure of duality. So when we know pain, we know real pain here. You know, we really experience pain here. Sometimes a lot of pain. What kind of choice making, what kind of intent, that's the key. What intent can we bring forward, even in that circumstance, when it's hard, when it's painful? Can we love the person next to us, even when we hurt, or even when they've been unkind, or even when our bodies are failing, or even when whatever, all the circumstances of life? Can we do that? Because this is the place to do that. And when we can bring forth that quality of intent, even in the rich contrast, that allows a refinement of who we really are, which transcends the physical. Okay, so then the physical's over. Now you step out of the highly constraining environment, but you retain the qualities of your consciousness that you developed while you were engaged in the physical. I don't like to only pigeonhole this, though, to just like personal development. There's a huge amount of development. It goes into, there's purposes that are greater than that, but I'm just focusing on this one idea for now, that when we drop the physical and the dense constraints are no longer a part of us, all that we developed of who we are while we were here remains, but now it is being actualized in systems that are far less constraining.
And what about like children who are born into very difficult circumstances and undergo a lot of suffering, and and die before they've even reached a level of maturity at which they have volition and you know, do they gain something from going through an ordeal like that?
Yes, absolutely. No, there's it's the human portion of us that typically thinks that success means achieving some level of, you know, some kind of maturity, whether it be physical or societal or something, and then getting something done. The spirit is consciousness, and so it knows experience. Experience is the currency, or that's a bad word. Experience is the stuff we're working with. So if you can be a child for 1 year and have that experience, and then you pass, that's amazing. That's an amazing experience. And also then others that were affected by you and experience being with you here in this context, it's amazing for them because you added to the context for them.
One of the things that I was shown in this room was my map, or my soul plan, laid out on this big, massive marble-like table. Again, nothing like what we have here. And what I saw in that was my own creation of all of this that I had previously referred to as bad. All these experiences that I had labeled wrong or inappropriate or shouldn't have happened. My molestation by my grandfather when I was 3 years old. My parents' divorce. My own divorce. My son being born early. All these things that I had labeled as bad now had no label at all. They just were. They were experiences in this map that I could now see. And each of the souls that I had these experiences with were part of it. And in this experience, one of the big breakthroughs and recognitions for me was that the souls that had, quote unquote, hurt me the most were actually closest to me in my soul family. My grandfather, who is no longer alive, that molested me when I was 3 years old, is in my soul family. And I had an agreement with him to carry out that experience. I'll have to explain in another video because it would take too much time to go into too much depth why we incarnate, because when you hear this, for many of you, and then for some of you it may not arise, the question comes, why would I come here and choose and map out to be molested or to be abused or to be neglected or starved? That creates this anger inside of the human being that says this shouldn't be happening. So I'll have to do another video on that because that's a whole other segment on itself. As I looked at this map, one of the things that occurred for me was I experienced each of the events again. And as there's no time, again, it was so fast, it was as if seconds were just passing, and I was born again, and I was 3 again, and I was 7 again, and I was experiencing all these things. And yes, some of the experience was me doing things that would I label unkind or mean, and yet in this vision of my experiences there was no punishment or bad girl, you shouldn't have done that, or this is wrong, or it shouldn't have been that way, and you're here to face your demons or your sins. None of that was happening, because there is none of that. There's nothing we can do here that is wrong. This is all mapped, this is all planned, this is all determined in advance. And so how can you penalize someone for something that you agree to from a soul perspective? This review was for no one but myself, for me to recognize that I'm perfect, I'm whole, I'm complete, I'm this amazing eternal being just as you are, and that there's nothing I can do here that is wrong, even the act of killing myself.
Well, the first thing was when I was in front of the light, I thought maybe there is a God and I'm in a lot of trouble. Because even though I didn't believe in a God, when I was sick, I cursed God and everything else. And I must have said what all good atheists say when they meet the light, "Are you God?" And the light said, the light knows you, the source, the oversoul, the source of all, knows you intimately and very personally. So when the source speaks to you, it speaks to you so you understand it completely. There is no confusion. If there is confusion, you're not there. And so when I asked the light, "Are you God?" the light said to me, "Who and what is not God?" And in that moment, I understood something. If I had to tell you who and what God is, I would have to name every single thing in the entire universe, and that would take forever. So the best answer is, what is not God? It's all God. And that liberated me. The next question I asked was, well, why would you create humanity? Why would humanity be created when there are such dark and evil beings? And at that moment, the light turned into a mandala, or like a big round stained glass window that was alive, and I was breathed into the center of it. And in that center, it was like I could look into every human soul, including my own, and I could see no evil at all, no darkness in any human that's ever lived. And that may shock you, it shocked me, but I was there in the nexus, the mandala of human souls. And there is something in us all, and in all of nature and all of Gaia, that's incorruptible. No matter what you've ever done, it's incorruptible. And that is that source in you that is perfect, that is there already. And in that moment, I heard the light say, "Oh, beautiful human." It was a blessing. And in that moment, I fell in love with humanity again.
You know, if you live in an area, say you live in the North Pole and you know nothing but snow and ice, you don't know what it's like to bask in the sun on a Florida beach. Unless you try it. So Source was sitting up there, perfect and everything else, but it just said, what does this mean?
I get it.
So the souls came into being so that Source could find what it was not. Unfortunately, the way we learn is in negativity.
Yeah, why is that?
Because completely positive is back home in unconditional love, where we can't learn anything. So we have to come down to the negativity, learn that we have the choice to get out of the negativity, to choose to be in the positive. And that's how we learn. Our whole purpose is to bring this understanding down into a human life so we can have fun just enjoying everything that's here. So the purpose of life is to realize that we are part of Source, that we are magnificent, that we can manifest things, that we do know everything if we allow ourselves to. Frequently, it's not so much for the person going through the dementia or the vegetative state, but for those around them, the caregivers, the family members, to deal with all of the guilt, the, they're leaving me, the abandonment, the betrayal. So by that time, the soul has generally had and done everything they wanted to do in this lifetime. Now, at the end, as they're starting to go through the process, it is for them to deal with the frustration. It's an example of going from an independent person to a dependent person. So that was one of the lessons they chose, was to feel and understand in the beginning what that dependence was on another. Well, that's the physical consciousness of the person. Their higher self, which is their unconscious, knows what's going on. But for some reason, they chose for their body, their consciousness, to experience the diminished capacity.
And I looked around, white horizon, nothing around, don't feel my body. Oh, I've died again. And so I get curious about who's singing this song to me. And I start to see a record player, like a vision being shown to me, a record player. And the record comes to the end, the stylus comes to the end of the record, and the song ends. And then it's like the record is lifted off and shown to me, and I can see it close up, and it's got deep gouges in the beginning. And I think, well, this record is damaged. It should just be thrown away. And I hear a voice. The marks are how I find you, so I can love you. You will not be thrown away. And I realized that I thought that I should be thrown away because I was damaged. And the voice, I got curious, where is this voice coming from? And I look and I can see through this white veil in front of me, and there's a being. And he's male, but he looks kind of feminine. His hair is black, and his hair is up on a bun on the top of his head, and I don't think it's odd that his skin is the blue, like a blue poppy. And he has beautiful ornamentation around him and on him. And as beautiful as he is, I can tell he's incredibly powerful. And I'm a little scared, because it feels like if he moved this hand, he could create a mountain. If he moved this hand, he would destroy the mountain. And I couldn't believe I was getting to be in front of such a big, powerful being, and that his focus and attention was on me. And he began to show me images. And he was showing me a flat plain. And the plain started to come together, and it was this kind of violent coming up of a mountain, and it was such a big event, and I was kind of scared and stepping back, and then the mountain started to erode. And the sand was coming down, and pieces were coming down, and then hillsides were coming down. And he was showing me it was making a beach. And he said to me, "Shall we bring down the mountain so you can have the beach?" And I said, "No, I like the mountain and the beach. I love when my feet walk in the warm sand on the beach. That feels so good." And he said, "Destruction makes available the ingredients for creation. Bringing down the mountain is part of making the beach. What looks like total destruction now is making available the ingredients for creation."
I was born in San Francisco, went to school in Sunnyvale. Growing up in my house, I had an alcoholic stepfather who was suffering, for lack of a better term, whatever it was in World War II. Now we call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress. But he had that. He'd come back from World War II. He used to carry a gun everywhere he went, loaded gun, and a knife. I mean, our household was a place of terror, negative thinking, alcoholism. We were poverty-stricken for the most part, and a lot of things happened. My mother was a shining light once in a while. She was a fortune teller. She was teaching me about yoga. She was teaching me about gurus. So I had a balance between darkness and light going on in my own household. Two different sides of the coin existing in the same place. Until you reach that point where you say, there is no separation. But giving up that individual self, my gosh, who wants to give up being me, you? But when you have a moment where you have a God moment, like samadhi, where all of a sudden you are everything around you and within you. You feel the tree, you see and hear the sky. You're all one. And when you have that experience, never again can you really not forgive somebody or not love somebody. You can not like somebody, that's okay. I don't like him, he's mean. But you love him. Because you know that is you. We're all one. There is no other thing going on. We're in this dream. It's a delusion. People go, oh, you're a soldier. These people, nobody got killed. Yes, people in their minds suffered. In this dream, they suffered. But in reality, it's all God. People don't get this. When I say this, people get really upset. God created Satan. So therefore, he created all evil too. Where are you going to separate? God only does good? God created evil. Why? And the mosquito, that's his too. Blame it on him, right? Come on, rats, that's all him. That's all God. Mankind tries to judge this through the human consciousness. As long as you're in creation, you're never truly going to know God.
It's really interesting. I've always, as a saying, I always say, even in life, I say, listen, unfortunately, bad things happen to good people. What I've come to realize and what I think is there's a consciousness and energy beyond us in this world that we don't see, we don't hear, we sometimes get glimpses of it. And there's a bigger plan or there's bigger reasons behind it. There's always going to be pain and suffering in this world. That is always going to happen. It's a part of life. And as unfortunate as it is and painful and sad, I would feel that we just have to look at it differently and say there's something behind this that I don't know at the moment. Maybe eventually I will realize what it is, or there'll be something more to it. I mean, how often have little things happened where, you then find out a week or a month or a couple hours later, oh, thank God that happened. Good thing I couldn't find my keys. I didn't get on this and I avoided an accident. We never know so much. And I feel with the bigger moments, with these tragedies, we look back and we say, oh, wow, like we didn't know. It could have been much worse. You're never going to get rid of whatever happened to you, a tragic event, an NDE, anything from your childhood or adulthood at any age. It's really a simple question of, well, we're not trying to fix anything, but really how can we take this event and integrate it into your life so you can function first and foremost, and then second from there, is there any way you can benefit and or grow forward and this make you a better person, or you're able to share or go from there. And I feel there's always good in everything. And sometimes we're too caught up in the moment to realize it, or maybe it has to come later once the initial emotion's over. But there's always, from what I've seen, there's always something positive that can come out. And I've chosen to focus on that and learn and grow and evolve. And it hasn't always been easy. It's been very tough. Having had an NDE, there's been a lot of strong feeling of loneliness at times, even around people. You feel like you don't fit in. You feel that you're just like in the wrong place. Like you look around at society and say, what am I doing here? I'm longing for a home I don't know.
Now, it's important to kind of like distinguish between what happens there and what happens here in the physical, because in the physical body, we have to process thought. So it takes time for us to learn something. It takes time for us to understand. But there, it was all knowing and it was instantaneous. There wasn't any thought process involved. There wasn't any weighing options. There wasn't reflecting on something based off of our own background or the possibilities of the future. It was just pure, simple knowing. And in this place, I understood in a way that I can't explain from a physical perspective, but at this knowing, this pure soul level, that there is no good or bad, that there is no right or wrong. And as I say, there are no lessons to learn, that everything that our soul or this other part of us is really aiming for is to experience. And particularly in the physical life, is to experience physical experiences through the physical body. Now, I can compare this physical life to that experience, but when I reflect on this, what I find very interesting is if I were to try to reflect on the physical experiences, so the pains, the trauma, even some of the memories, I would have a hard time explaining it in that place to somebody. Like if I were to sit down with another soul in the void and say, this is what my physical life that I just came from was like, it would be really very difficult from my experience to do that because it wasn't available. What was available, though, were all of the feelings, every feeling that I had ever had. And it felt like every feeling that everybody had ever had was what was experienced in the oneness. And although there's a lot of pain and trauma that we can experience here in the physical, what's available to us through this void or this oneness that I connected to, the love is so unbelievable and so complete that any trauma or any pain that we may experience or that I experienced in the physical life just wasn't accessible there. It was like I don't want to say it didn't exist because I feel like that invalidates us and our experience here, but it feels like I didn't carry that trauma or that pain into that experience.
When I was in the light and I was observing all of my activities, all of my life activities, when I was in the light observing them, there was not judgment. There was no good or bad. There wasn't good or evil. There wasn't right or wrong. They were just things that were done, choices made, that were either choices that fostered love and kindness and joy, or choices that fostered fear and hatred. And when you're in the light and you're looking at that, it's different than looking at it now. In this world, when I look at some atrocities, I feel really bad about that. And it's a different type of feeling when you're in the light. It's observing and understanding that you would not do that again. That wasn't a thing that helped promote love and kindness. It promoted separation and fear. And it's like looking at your life and being able to walk away from it as you would if you saw a very intense movie. When I see movies, I really get into it to the point where sometimes I'm living the movie for those few minutes. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden the movie's over and I walk out. Well, I know it's a movie, okay? All the emotions that I had while I was watching it were still there, but when the movie's over, I know that it's not real, it was a movie.
Now, the last thing that happened before I was resuscitated was that God spoke to me. Now, you wouldn't think that he would say this, because most churches wouldn't accept what I'm saying. But I was in a marriage that was very abusive. I was previously married to someone who was an engineer, and he had trouble with his own family. His own sisters didn't trust him. And I loved him and I was trying very hard to help him change in his life. But after 8 years, it hadn't been okay, and it wasn't working. And I was afraid to leave. I wanted to not give up on him and try to help him beyond where he was at. And it wasn't going anywhere. I was not only being physically abused, but extreme mental abuse, real emotional abuse. And my children were actually also in that category. So I was trying to protect them and try to keep things balanced and doing everything that he wanted me to do to be perfect, but I could never be perfect. And it was a very hard place to be in. So the thing that God said to me very calmly at the end of my time up there on the ceiling with him was, if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do? He didn't tell me what to do. He asked me, what will I do? And that really was a moment that I had to stop and think, if you let me go back, I promise you that I'll become strong enough to leave him. That was very hard.
And there before me was the living presence of the being of light. And this being was all-knowing. It knew everything that was going to happen and will happen, and the reasons behind them. And there was a perfect justice. And it also contained all things that ever were or will be. And it was loving me. It was just pouring out this unconditional love at me. And I thought, well, this isn't the guy on the top of the Sistine Chapel. I had this, image of what God would be like, but I figured this has to be God because this is beyond words and perfect in every possible sense. And it just also didn't make sense to me because the world that I had left behind, we were at war in Vietnam, and I was very angry about the war and about all the suffering that goes on this planet, and the Holocaust, which I had learned about, and we were learning more at the point in 1970. We were learning how horrible it had been. And so what happened was, in a sense, the love kept coming to me, but I just couldn't receive it at that time. And I got to ask all my big whys. I got to ask all of the things that I had ever wondered about. And those were the top 3 things that struck me that I had spent a lot of time thinking about, and in my justification for not believing in God. and what happened is all of my thoughts just went out telepathically, and the answers, the perfect answers, came back. It wasn't the way like we talk, it was like the entire answer and all of its ramifications instantly came into my head. And the only thing I remember, I don't remember the details, this was specifics of the answers, but I knew that I had known these things before. And I thought, oh, of course, how could I ever have forgotten? And so what happened is, after a while, I ran out of questions because I got it. I got the whole picture, the perfect knowledge that is present in the mind of God or everywhere, and I understood it.
One of the big questions, I think is probably one of the oldest questions, is, okay, if God is a good, loving God, then how is it possible that he could allow the evil and the horror that obviously exists? How is that possible if he really does, if God is pure love? And so I think that religions had to invent an anti-God to explain that. Oh, that's not God, that's the devil doing that stuff, right? Well, that means God made the devil too. So I mean, it doesn't add up. But I can tell you one thing for sure. There was no judgment. There was no atonement. There was nothing that I had ever done that was completely forgiven. And forgiven in that context meant it was gone. It did not exist. The stupid little boneheaded things I've done in my life that have been, well, let's just say less than wonderful. I didn't have to atone for that. God wasn't holding me accountable for that. God was loving me right through it, and it was total and complete forgiveness.
Before my near-death experience, I had had many obstacles, many challenges in my life, and I had given up hope and I had lost faith. And then I had my near-death experience. I knew that even in my darkest moments, I was okay, that I would always be all right. Things are always how they're supposed to be. And I was unconditionally loved, that I'm never alone. And I had hope again. I changed my life drastically. I started to make positive changes in my life, and that was figuring out that I needed to love myself, that I was worthy and deserving of love. And when I started to realize that, I started making positive changes. Some of my family and friends thought that I was changing too much, and I lost some of them along the way because I was making these changes, because I wasn't allowing myself to be a doormat anymore. And some of my friends and family didn't like that. And I had hope again, and I knew I can get through anything because of my experience. And I had many challenges after my experience. And I feel like I was given the gift of my near-death experience to help me get through those challenges as well. Not only the challenges leading up to it, but challenges afterwards. 3 years after my experience, I filed for divorce. I had found out that my husband and my best friend of 10 years had slept together, and I had had enough. I was laid off from Montecito Bank and Trust. After they had shut down the mortgage division, they outsourced it overseas. That was the first time I lost my job. In 2009, the mortgage broker that I was working for went out of business, and I lost my job for the second time. In 2014, I was working for Washington Mutual, and they shut down multiple mortgage divisions throughout California. Actually, it was Wells Fargo, and I lost my job for a third time. I received a call. My mom suffered a stroke, and that she had 2 hours to 2 weeks to live. She passed away 2 days later. My cat, and I'm a big animal lover, who I'd had for 19 years, passed away from old age. And then my dog, Lily, who was 7, this sounds so awful, passed away from a stroke. So I had suffered all this loss, and I'd gone through a divorce. Within 7 years, I was laid off 3 times. After I had lost my job, I received a letter from my landlord saying that my rent was going up from $1,900 a month to $2,100 a month. And over the years, I had cashed out my retirement. I had used my savings account to supplement my income. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent, let alone my bills. I was in financial distress. And that night, I fell to my knees, and I was praying to God, and I was crying. And I clearly heard the 3 messages that I received during my experience. I heard them over and over again. You are unconditionally loved. Everything's always as it's supposed to be. Everything will be all right. And I knew that I was going to be okay. I woke up the next morning, and I immediately found an affordable apartment. And I had been looking for an apartment since December of 2013. And up to that point, I thought I was going to have to live out of my car. And that terrified me. And I literally took out a phone book. I opened it up to an apartment complex in Solvang. I called the property manager. His name is Bill. He picked up the phone. I explained, I live in Santa Barbara. I'm looking for a more affordable apartment. Do you have any openings? He's like, I have one that just came due. It's yours if you want it. I didn't fill out a credit application. He didn't meet me in person. He just said, it's yours if you want it. And I drove up there that day and put down a security deposit, and I had an affordable place to live. So it was after that moment of despair, and after I heard those messages of love and support, that I started using affirmations daily and gratitude. And that all goes back to my near-death experience. And I started to figure out, I was giving these messages for a reason. I was giving these messages for a purpose. And so now every day, I say my daily core affirmations, which are those 3 messages, and I say my gratitude. Affirmations for me are huge. I had used affirmations for an entire year before I was hired on with the company that I'm at now, full-time with benefits, which included a raise. So you have to stay devoted, you have to stay committed. It's not going to happen overnight. But know that if it's not okay, it's not the end. Follow your intuition. You follow that voice. You listen to that voice. Don't dismiss it. Your past doesn't define you. It wasn't a life sentence, it was a life lesson. And again, that goes back to all the challenges in my life that I experienced or will experience are learning opportunities. Learn from that experience, traumatic or good, so that you can free yourself from it and you can move on and move forward.
Look how we can say that things are going better for someone. The world is in such disaster. And people come to me with the feeling of disempowerment, and they say, what can I do? I'm just one person. Look at the world, what all these teachings can do for the world. And I said, you can do everything or you can do nothing. It all depends. You can do nothing if you see the problems of the world as a whole. So I put the example of a house. Say that you have a big castle, and the castle is in absolute mess. Every room, everything in this house, in this castle is just disorganized. There was a huge party, a mess, a disaster. The moment that you think that you can clean all this house in one morning, in 1 minute, in one moment, the feeling of overwhelming is such that you will become disempowered. What can you do? Nothing. So you cannot see the problems of the world as a whole, because then you disempower yourself. But the moment you think, oh, what if I start room by room? What if I start by clearing up the kitchen? What if I cannot even do the whole kitchen? What if I start by the table? And little by little, the moment you organize this space and you pat yourself on the shoulder, oh, I did this. So now you're putting that you're learning in practice. You're empowering yourself. I can do something. Peace starts with each one of us. The moment we expect that others do it, the moment I look outside and say, look at the mess outside, I cannot do anything, I lost the battle. But the moment I say, I am this being capable of loving, capable of giving, then now I am becoming that light. And each one of us can be the light in the path of each other. I am not a light that is going to work alone, because one light is easy to be blown away by the wind. But what if I start joining like we're doing here? Another person that already discovered, I have that inner light. I have that inner power, and all these lights start joining, and now we become a huge flame. And this is actually happening this moment in the world. Although there's still a lot of chaos out there, there's a lot of people waking up right now. A lot of people that have been shaking so hard by all these challenges and all these hardships that we're starting to realize, what can we actually do? What can I do myself? Only now that people are starting to ask the questions, because these questions have been formulated throughout the history of humanity, but just by few. Who am I? What is my purpose? Is this all it is? What if there's more? When we start asking these questions, we start evolving, seeking for something new. And all of us that have all these experiences are being able to talk, because now I know that that person had it and that person, now people start feeling safer to talk. And there's more conferences and more groups and more people that are coming outside the box and knowing that there's more, and feeling that I want to talk. But sometimes before the big awakening, there's also even bigger challenge. Before you wake up, there's the alarm clock, or there's somebody shaking you awake. So that's sometimes what is needed, and the world is now facing that point in which there's a lot going on. But that's just kind of like the earthquake that is needed for people to go to this realization, I had enough of this. Is when we move out of the couch. I put the example of a bird that is in a nest. Then life will push you so hard that now you make the decision, I better jump. And the moment you jump and spread the wings, now you realize, oh, I can fly. So if all these challenges didn't happen, you never knew that you could actually fly.